Hello everyone, it's Johnny Joe Lennis again, and today I'm going to be talking about some questions that pertain to the first 86 pages of the Unspeakable Mind. I'm going to talk about my responses and a few of my peers' responses who will remain unnamed. So the first question talks about Jane's description of trauma, and based off of that, do we feel like we've had trauma in our life? Now, Jane gives a very broad description of trauma, which I think holds a lot of truth, because trauma isn't one thing, it's several things. It could be anything, and really it's subjective, it's based off perception. So, when my mother passed away in 2019, I went through a lot of things, of course, that I won't get into, but one of which is my anxiety. I started getting irrational, intrusive thoughts of death. With that being said, when the pandemic hit, it was a very, very scary time, seeing how there was no cure, no treatment, nothing. It was just a virus that we had to battle as we went along. Now, thankfully we have a vaccination now, but before, that wasn't even in my head. I thought it was going to be 10 years from now. So yes, I did go through a sense of trauma. It was filled with anxiety, panic attacks, all of the above. Now, not everybody feels that way, but I do have someone that just shares some of the same thoughts. Hers isn't verbatim, but she talks about being a nurse and already being in an environment where infection and contagious illnesses could be caught. Now, she said she became a germaphobe. I'm sure she was already before, seeing how she's a nurse, but I think what she's trying to emphasize is that her attitude changed a lot more, not only in the workplace, but in her life. So trauma does affect us in very different ways. The second question goes on to tell us about a quote in the book that states that there's about 6 million individuals that are dealing with PTSD. How do we feel about that, and how should we address it? My response to that is that I think the most alarming part of it is in the book she talks about people that don't even come in until well into their life. I know there was an older gentleman that she referenced that he had dealt with it for years, all the way until he was an elderly man through drug abuse, alcohol abuse. He did go to a doctor at one point, but they gave him pretty much a Band-Aid medication instead of actual treatment. Until finally, after he was quote-unquote cleared by himself, really, he had another exacerbation following up in his life. And it started keeping him awake at night and intervening in his life. That's when he sought real help for his mental health. And that is only when he was able to actually tackle it. Unfortunately, he died before he could have real progress. But the point is that he was on the right path at that moment. But people don't always get to that point. So I think to combat that, we need to spread more awareness about what PTSD is, how to notice it, and that it's not as easy to spot as everyone thinks. You need to seek mental health if you feel like something is wrong in that department. And then I think there was somebody here who said that about the same thing, one of my peers, that it's a large topic, it's very hard to talk about, and some people don't even get that they have it. So the only way to get rid of it is to spread more awareness so people know exactly what other people are going through, and they might be going through the same thing. The third question goes on to ask, as a future health professional, how do we feel about the statement that she says, being a psychiatrist has taught me that how patients share things is just as important as what they say. Now, I used to be a dental assistant for about 4 years. That's not as high up as most health professionals, but I had my experience nonetheless. And one thing that I noticed is that sometimes patients leave things out, either because they think it's benign or because they're embarrassed about something and they think it won't harm them, they won't say anything. Either way, if you read them and actually listen to them, how they're talking, you might ask questions that they didn't even think of. So, with that being said, of course I think it's important to read the patient, because sometimes they might not even know what they're trying to tell you. And you can always assist them, but you have to be listening. Not just hearing, but listening. Now, one of my peers started to talk about it, more specifically on top of PTSD, and which is a great way to do it because PTSD is so broad, but yet people, especially the general public, think it's very narrow, almost like it's only for veterans, which isn't true. But there's no way to know unless we spread this awareness. Now, for the fourth question, and the final question, it asks about the relationship between sleep and PTSD, described in the book, and how we feel about that. One of my peers talks about that the relationship to PTSD and sleep does not surprise her, because some people have trouble falling asleep, and it's always because their brain is running. And I think that why they went that way is because with PTSD, you have these intrusive thoughts that constantly haunt you. So it's almost like you can't escape them, which is greatly a big reason why it keeps you up at night. I feel the same way. Sleep is very vital to our existence. It won't kill us right away, but slowly and surely it will start deteriorating the way we think, our cognitive abilities, so forth and so on. So for somebody who has PTSD, it's almost like a negative feedback loop. They're continuously keeping up at night because their PTSD keeps them up. But without the sleep deprivation starts causing them to have more anxiety, and so on and so forth, and it just keeps going on. Well, those are the 4 questions with my responses and my peers' responses. I hope you guys had fun listening. Thank you and have a nice day.